Welcome, everyone. We are live. My name is Jordan Bain. This podcast is called Unveiling. My guest tonight, or this afternoon, depending on when you're watching, is Whitney Larson. I've known Whitney for about 7 or 8 years now, actually. She originally was a student of mine back in Boston. She now lives in Orange County, California. Myself, I'm a certified guide and Kabbalah teacher and ritual master and a lot more in the lineage of King Solomon through the Modern Mystery School. And I've been doing this work since about 2005. And my mission is really to help empower people to live their higher purpose, to know themselves, and to heal on a soul level so they can step into their work and their mission for this life. Whitney is an apprentice guide, certified healer and ritual master in the lineage of King Solomon, also through the Modern Mystery School. She's also getting her master's degree right now, and she's a therapist in training at Golden Gate Integral Counseling Center. She lives in Orange County, as I said, where she serves people creating healthy, positive, loving relationships, especially with themselves, which brings us to our topic for this podcast, which is trusting yourself. So, Whitney, thanks for being on. It's great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to talk about trusting yourself.
Yeah, my pleasure. So we chatted about this podcast like a month or two ago, and we were talking about the topic, and you suggested this topic. So I'm really curious why this came through as something you want to talk about at this time. Like, what is it that drew you to this topic for discussion about trusting yourself?
Well, I have been on a really long journey with this particular thing. And when I was younger, I really struggled with not trusting myself. And I got a lot of validation from other people, and I would source it through like certifications or through being in a relationship. And what I realized in that process was just after like tripping and falling many times was that I really didn't know myself and I really didn't trust myself to have my best interest at heart.
Mm.
And so in the last, I don't know where, sorry, it did a little like buffering thing and I got tripped up for a second. But
No worries.
um
Couldn't see it
so
on the end.
yeah, so in the last like especially year and a half, I've been really committed to like, no, I need to trust myself. I need to do what's right for me. I am just like pushing to do that so that I can actually have the life that I truly desire and love. And so that's where this, yeah.
Yeah. So in the past for you, you're saying that you would trust outside sources or look to outside sources, either like for validation, whether that was a certification or person.
Hmm.
And then what was the turning point for you in deciding that you really needed to trust what was going on inside of you? What changed?
Yeah. So I was in a relationship. I had moved across the country and I had decided to really start in this new journey in my life.
Hmm.
I was living in California and I moved to Boston. So I found myself back near you again.
Mhm.
And it didn't turn out the way I had wanted it to.
Mhm.
And so I started
Probably
reflecting.
probably 'cause of me, I mean,
Yeah, I'll just blame it on you.
yeah.
Perfect.
Or we could blame it on Boston, right?
Yeah, that
This
too.
area,
Yeah,
people who are
or my ex. That's
yeah, blame it on the ex, it's
right.
easy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of places we could put the blame.
sure.
But I I was reflecting and I was like, you know what? I have been in this position many times where
Mm.
I things aren't working out for me. They're not going
Mhm.
the way that I want them to go. What's the lowest or like what's the lowest common denominator? It's like, well, okay, it's me. There's something going on with me. And I started reflecting. I just started reflecting and that I had looked back on all these times previous in my life where I was just like, I realized I was listening to this other person and I was like giving up my agency and my will.
Whoever that might have been,
Yeah.
right.
Hmm. Yeah. So across the board, and I could see it in like what I was eating, where I was living, what I was choosing to invest my time and my energy in.
Hmm. So you were seeing this pattern like a year and a half ago that regardless of where you were and regardless of where you put that power, there was always someone else that you were kind of listening to about
Mhm.
how to eat, how to think, how to be.
Yeah.
And then something like maybe did all those forces just come together and come into a moment of realization for you? Like how did that happen? And then where have you taken it since then?
So it was the last time I was in the Kabbalah tree. Actually, no,
Mm-hmm.
not the last time. Sorry, it was the time before. This 2 years ago when I was in the Kabbalah tree when all this was happening. I had made a commitment to myself that I was going to stick through this time. I was going to give it my all in this relationship, give it my all there in Boston. And if by the time I finished, I
Mm-hmm.
would, I felt like I would know. And I
Mm-hmm.
really did. I really put like all my effort into it. And what I found at the end of this journey was that I didn't have joy. Like I wasn't joyful
Mm. Despite all your effort.
despite all my efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I realized that, that locked something in for me where it was like I knew I was like, oh, like I knew what joy felt like, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had this sense. And then not having it there made me, excuse me, make a new choice
Mm-hmm.
and feel intent to discover what that was. And so I was like, where do I want to go? Where do I want to be right now? What do I
Mm-hmm.
want to do? And so I moved back to California, moved
Mm-hmm.
in with my family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did a meditation journey for 3 months
Mm-hmm.
and I got a lot more clarity. And since then, it's been working with things little by little.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So what have you discovered in that journey of trusting yourself? Like what have been the biggest challenges for you, for example? Like what's come up to hold you back? What have been the things from the past or the
Yeah.
obstacles?
Yeah. Self doubt is a big one.
Mhm.
Um, because for me, when I trust myself, it's like I kind of just, I have, I work more intuitively. I don't necessarily
Mhm.
have good reasons necessarily for doing what I want to do. And so trusting that intuition and has been a challenge and because self-doubt will come up and I'll second guess myself and I'll try to rationalize like, oh, I should do this because this, or no, I shouldn't do this because this X, Y, and Z. Um, and what I found when I do move forward with that gut intuition and I follow through, whether or not it's like overtly a success or a failure, um, doesn't really matter. It's like I know
Mm.
it's like I know that I can deal with whatever the result is,
Mhm.
and
So that's like a feeling you have when
yeah,
you're working now,
yeah,
when you're trusting your intuition. What is that? I mean, I can guess because, we teach a lot of this stuff in the mystery school, but what is that process been for you to move into self-trust? Like, what have you done? This is a pretty open-ended question,
yeah.
so I'm not even sure where you'll take it, but
What
I'd
have
love to
I
know that
done?
insight. Like, what have you done that's made the shift? Like, was it
Right.
just Kabbalah? Was it just your commitment? Was it, did you heal a specific thing inside yourself? Like, was there
Mhm.
something you found that you were doing that you needed to do differently other than, what you said already? Like, basically not let other people dictate how you're going to make your choices.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's a great question. So healing for sure.
Mhm.
Um, Anxiety, like really
Mhm.
working with my anxiety, social anxiety, feeling like I have to perform and learn or live
Mhm.
up to other people's expectations. That's
Right.
been a huge challenge for me. And so I've worked on that a lot over the last year. And then I've also worked a lot on healing like wounding from past relationships.
Mhm.
And so I I've been learning how to source like love for myself just internally
Mhm.
and giving those woundings, patterns, um, space to be as they are and
Yeah.
move through them.
Can you give
Yeah.
an example of, like, how this has showed up for you maybe since you went to California? Like, what you found making this change? Because you kinda made that change, from my
Yeah.
understanding, what it looked like from the outside, knowing you at the time, like, you made
Mhm.
that change and then were like, "Alright, I'm leaving. I'm going to California, and I'm gonna restart a different life there." Maybe not a totally new life because you lived there before,
Right.
but, you were living in a different part of California now,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
living with family is different than living on your own like you were doing before. And then deciding to go back to school,
Yep.
deciding to do more service and help people using mystery school tools. Like there's a lot that you decided to change at that time. And I'd love to hear from you, like maybe some examples or stories about how that's been since you got there. Because you got there in like August 2020. When did you sort of land
July.
on
July.
California? July. Okay,
Yeah.
July 2020. So we're going on 2 years that we've been out there. I'd love to hear whatever you want to share about stories.
Stories.
Since
Gosh.
looking back, like what's different now?
Gosh. Well, um, I I feel I almost don't know how to answer that question. It's so broad. What's a story?
Like fun things that have happened or
Yeah.
ways that because we're
Yeah.
talking about
Okay. All right.
trusting yourself. So
Right.
what how is your life physically reflecting you trusting yourself more now?
Yeah.
What that look
Yeah.
like for
I
you?
would say I have um, like great friendships, great relationships. Like the community that I'm a part of, I feel really supported by. I love that, and
Mhm.
that's brought a lot of joy in my life. I've traveled a fair amount in the last like year and a half, even though it was COVID. Like I just felt
Mhm.
like going on adventure and spontaneity is
Mhm.
has been a priority for me. Um, like you mentioned, I'm finishing my degree that I started literally 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and and that
Why
is
so why did you stop that degree? That
well,
might be an interesting story
yeah,
about
so I yeah,
self-trust. I'm guessing, I have no idea. We haven't really talked much about that, so
absolutely. So I started my counseling psychology degree in 2012,
Mhm.
and I did about a year and a half before I took a leave of absence. And I took a leave of absence because I was dating someone, and um, I got in this relationship. Just soon after that, I got initiated. I had met you. Soon
Mhm.
after that, I got initiated. And I was in this relationship. And right after I got initiated, I had this intuition of like, oh, I need to not be with this person. So I
Mm.
told them, and what I got back was, oh, I can't believe that you want to leave this relationship because you don't think we can grow together. You don't think we can evolve together. And I was like, oh my God, do I really think that? It was at this moment of like looking back, certainly doubted myself and led to one of the most like worst relation. It's literally the worst relationship I've ever had in my entire life.
Right.
And it all started with that moment of not trusting my intuition.
Hmm.
And so I struggled a lot in that time, and so I let go of school, and I tried to go back a couple times, but it didn't for a number of reasons. I didn't
Mhm.
complete it. But every time I was single, I would have this desire to finish my degree, but then I would get into another relationship and then I would let it go. And so finally, I was like, "Damn it, I'm single. It's happening again. I have to do this." And so
Mhm.
that's so I'm finally doing it. And so
Congrats.
yeah, in
I mean,
May.
that's a story.
That's a good story. Yeah.
That's a story. And so how long do you have left?
Just until May. So I have, what is it? 2 months, 2 months
Not
and
even a whole semester.
yeah,
Yeah, you're already in your final semester.
yeah,
Awesome. And so then you'll have a master's degree in counseling.
yeah,
Very cool. That's yeah, again, congratulations.
yeah. Thank you.
So people getting your degree,
Yeah.
relationships, people,
Hmm.
friendships.
Hmm.
What else is different now? Like what else is how are you living that's reflecting that, self-trust? Um, what are the other changes that you've seen from making this decision like almost 2 years ago now?
Yeah.
Because we finished that Kabbalah in March, early March. No, yeah, early March 2020.
Yeah.
So we're just shy of 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. The other changes I've seen, well, I became a guide in the last year. That's a huge change. So I've stepped a lot more into service,
Yeah,
and that's really fulfilling, and it feels really good to be doing that.
yeah.
I just recently.
Do you want to share? Because there's maybe people who are watching this who they understand what a master's in counseling is, but they might not know what a guide is. Do you want to share a little bit about what that means? I know that I say, hey, I'm a certified guide, but then I don't really mention
Right.
anything about it. But if you're saying,
Right.
this is like one of my self-trust stories and accomplishments, like I think
Yeah.
worth talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it was a huge step. So it was definitely scary to be like, okay, I'm going to be a guide in this holy lineage
Mhm.
and take on the responsibility of holding light for people to know who they truly are as a divine being. Like
Mhm.
that's a huge thing. And so,
You definitely have to trust yourself for that.
yeah,
There's a lot that
yeah,
goes in.
right. And so it's been like stepping into that responsibility has actually given me a huge piece of myself
Mm,
back. I feel
mhm,
more confident in my body. I feel more able to connect with people, um,
mhm,
and less like worried about what other people are doing,
mhm.
less comparison to other people,
Yeah.
to put it in a different way. And I'm still learning what it is to be a guide. And I think that's another thing about what I'm learning about trusting yourself is that as as I'm growing and evolving, as we all grow and evolve, we only really have limited view of who really truly are based on everything that we've been through and who we are and where we are in this moment. But
Mhm,
in terms of trusting yourself and knowing yourself to become who you desire to become, you have to take risks. Like you have to step into that unknown and to make room for that growth.
mhm.
Continually knowing and trusting yourself, because maybe the way that I trusted myself or knew myself, yes, so a year ago, 2 years ago, was very different than how I feel about myself now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have to really step in, and that's a scary thing to say, I'm gonna serve somebody else. I think the self-trust topic is really interesting because it's very hard to do service to others if we don't trust ourselves.
Yeah.
It's really hard to show up and say like, "Yeah, I can help you." But I mean, I haven't helped myself. That's like
Hmm. Hmm.
questionable, highly questionable, right? But then
Hmm.
to say, "No, I do trust myself. I know what I am. I know who I am. I know where this work leads. I know what I want to serve people with, whether it's counseling and coaching, whether it's um, more spiritual work, like with the mystery school,
Hmm.
and being able to own that
Hmm.
and say, yeah, this is me. That all takes a lot of self confidence, at least. And self confidence and self trust are really, of course, interrelated with that.
Yeah.
There's not really much of a difference in terms of our spiritual connection and when we say self confidence and self trust, at least in my experience. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And
that's a really big shift for you, it sounds like.
yeah. And self-confidence based on who, like, what's inside versus like self-confidence based on like what I can achieve or how I have performed. It's like really coming from the inside out versus like the outside in. No doubt, like doing things in the world and achieving things does build self-confidence, absolutely. But if
Mhm.
you've never done something before, there's something that you need to take that step to do it for the
Mhm.
first time,
Right.
right? And I think what I'm realizing through this conversation is like, well, you have to trust yourself
Yeah.
to be able to take that step to do the new thing that you've never done before.
Yeah. And that way self-confidence and self-trust may be a little different because self-confidence often, like you said, does come from having a track record.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, I've done this before. I'm confident in it.
Right.
But trusting yourself maybe is more, I'm going to take a leap and do something differently.
Right.
No, and that's, over time, self-trust and self-confidence like pretty much end up the same thing,
Hmm.
depending on how we're using them. But for most people,
Yeah.
in the ideal circumstance, and yet self-trust is needed to grow into
Right.
something new.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah. And so back to your question of like, oh, what are the other things that I've done, the new things that I've done in the last year and a half, that
mhm,
reminded me. So I taught sacred geometry for the first time. I taught
mhm,
astro travel for the first time. I
mhm,
taught spiritual intuition for the first time. So there are all these firsts for me actually.
mhm.
Those are just three of them that have
Awesome.
come.
That's
Yeah.
very cool. Yeah. What do you say to people who maybe are struggling with self-confidence or self-doubt or self-love or self-trust, like any of those core things that can be like our core woundings, and for you, you've talked a little bit about how this has led to certain bad decisions, in that one moment of not trusting yourself, you were in a relationship for several years that was like, like you said, the worst relationship you've ever been in.
It was terrible. It was terrible. It
Mm.
was like literally the worst time in my life. Yeah.
And that's how we often get into bad situations is we don't trust ourselves. We don't
Yeah.
listen to ourselves. We're not being loving with ourselves. We know it's like we have that flash, that intuition, like, hey, this would be the right choice. I'm going to go do something different
Right.
from the right choice. And then we make the wrong choice. And we can't blame that on anybody else.
Right.
We have to say, okay, well, I knew this wasn't right. And I still went ahead and did it.
Hmm.
And rather than let that undermine your self-trust, you've been able to use these tools and turn that around.
Right. Yeah, because those things aren't easy to face. But I think that is one of the keys is to face them and to acknowledge where you make the mistake of
Yeah.
where, oh, like the worst thing that I did right in that moment was I betrayed myself.
Yeah.
And like that's really painful, actually. It's
Yeah.
really hard to see. Um, for example, just to kind of bring it into like psychology and trauma, like a lot of war veterans, what is often the most traumatizing is what they have done to other people and not
Right.
necessarily what they have seen. So it's like whatever you did to yourself or whatever you did to someone else can be more traumatizing than seeing a traumatic event from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Definitely. The responsibility of, self-betrayal or the responsibility of facing something that didn't go the way we wanted it to, and then there's no one else to blame for it. That's one of the most painful things that we can face, and to really heal and integrate that takes a lot of strength,
Hmm.
and that's I mean that's part of the advantage. Like as you know, with Kabbalah, you
Yeah.
that higher strength.
Yeah.
And it's not a coincidence that after you took that wish through the tree of life for a year, you had the strength to be able to say, okay, yeah, I tried and it didn't work.
Right.
Because, hey, when you try something and it fails, then you have to face the pain of the fact that it failed.
Yeah.
Like a relationship fails and you go, okay, well, why did it fail? Well, he, she, blah, 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 they did that. Okay, yeah, but I was half of that. So at least half of it didn't work because of my choices.
Yeah.
And then to know that you made the wrong choice way back in the day, because most people that I talk to, myself included, when I talk to myself, um,
We all talk to ourselves, I do at least.
right? It's like I knew if I was honest with myself, and that's the difficult thing there is that self-honesty too. At least in my experience personally, and talking with a lot of people, is like I knew this was or wasn't right, but then I still did this other thing because of fill in the blank. Like there's a lot of motivations we all have that are not really coming from our highest truth,
Yeah.
our highest light, our highest self-knowledge.
Right.
And, when we, someone's just commenting here that we're awesome. This is what they need to hear. Great.
Oh,
Um, so when we're not doing what's from our highest self-truth and we turn some other direction, that in all my experiences is recorded somewhere inside. Like
mm,
our being, something shuts down in us at the moment we make that decision to turn away from what we know is true. And then at some moment when we're ready, maybe we've learned the lesson enough. I don't know, maybe the universe aligns and the stars, like whatever the reason is, there's a moment when we're like, oh, I need to go back and reclaim that part of myself.
yeah.
Whatever that turning point might be, whatever stimulates it for any one of us, when we do reach that turning point, we have to go back and find the part of ourselves that we gave up. There's always a pain associated with it because we turned away from what we knew was right. And we did it for all the right reasons that seemed so logical at the time. Well, I don't want to, but even like our ego could be so complicated. Like, I don't want to betray myself, so I'm going to stick in this relationship.
Right. Because I made that commitment.
Right. So I'm going to betray myself in the attempt to not betray myself.
Yeah.
That's, our egos can get really complex like that.
Yeah.
And as we get older in our lives, they get more and more complex because there's usually more wounding. And so those things kind of like stack up in our subconscious. There's like more and more data files that support the wounding. And so it's easier to try and think our way through it, but that still doesn't really lead us to the truth. Like we think our way into something, but like self-trust, we just kind of know.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't need to think our way through it.
No. And that's part of, and bringing it back to one thing you touched on earlier, which is like not just like ego knowing, but like higher knowing. And how do we get in touch with that higher knowing of like, okay, what is my higher self saying? What is truly like for my highest and best good? And then which ultimately will be for the highest and best good of everyone involved in the situation.
Right. And that highest and best good of everyone involved is simple, but is often like a harder choice.
Yeah.
Because we need like that sort of full spectrum emotional honesty.
Yeah.
Say, this is good for me now. In Kabbalah, like we talk about mercy and severity.
Right.
For a certain point of the tree of life. And like a severe decision can often be thought of as one that is harsh, or in the Kabbalah definition, like the pillar or the side, the entire side of the tree sort of has these two polar opposite sides, and they meet together in what we call the middle pillar. One of the pillars of the tree of life is severity. And a severe decision, usually in most of our minds, is reflective of something that cuts away or says no, or shuts something down or stops something. It's like the warrior energy is that severe energy. And then a merciful decision or action is often thought of as one that embraces something or says yes, or brings something closer to us, or is kind, or is loving, and we're going to put loving in quotes there because, mystery school teachings say that love is actually a balance of both of these two things. That love is really a balance of mercy and severity, that we don't get to higher love unless we have both of these in the right proportion at the right time. Some situations require more severity, some situations require more mercy, but love is wherever those need to meet in the middle. And yet most people's concept of love is the merciful side of things. That's sort of like the cultural ethic that we inherit from, especially like Judeo-Christian tradition, that has sort of formed the basis of Western, philosophy and thought for the last couple thousand years, is that mercy has the one up on severity in terms of love, that it's more loving to be really, really kind all the time or really nice, even though that might mean you compromise yourself. So when we talk about mercy and severity, Kabbalistically speaking, what might hurt now, what might be severe now, is going to be the most merciful decision. But oftentimes we give that away and we make what we think is a merciful, loving decision now, but then we end up with these very severe consequences later on, with this kind of pain that then we have to go back and face, because you can't make more bad decisions And like 5 wrong decisions doesn't equal a right decision.
Right. It doesn't.
Like 15 years of like, it's not really working doesn't mean the 16th year is gonna start working.
Right.
You know, like 5 bad relationships doesn't mean, well, the next one's probably gonna be better.
Right.
That's not a given at all.
No, you have
That's
to make changes.
yeah.
Yeah, you have
And
to face, you have to look.
how do you trust yourself when you've already made all those bad decisions? That's kind of the healing miracle here,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And we can fill in the blank with mystery school
Right.
tools to get there.
Mhm.
Yet, like, how did you trust yourself? I mean, maybe the answer really is just like, yeah, I went through the tree of life a lot. I did a lot of healings, and then
Uh-huh.
I came to trust myself. But if
Yeah.
you're saying, so I was in the worst relationship of my life, and I moved back out to California, and I was in that relationship, and then I got into another relationship that also didn't work.
Uh-huh.
How do you say,
But it
well,
was
now
better.
it was better, but
It was better.
that's good. That's heading in the right direction.
So, but that
Maybe that's part of it. You're like, well, I
that's
seem to
part
be
of it though.
moving up.
Right,
So,
yeah, because kabbalistically, we're like, "Okay, well, look at the fruits," right?
mhm,
"By the fruits you shall know." And so and I was pretty consistently in a tree of life with maybe a 4-month break here or there.
mhm,
I have been since I started studying it. Um, and so to me, that tells me I'm on the right track.
mhm,
This is working. So yeah, healing's mystery school, but it's like you have to be awake and aware and look. You're like, okay, well, is this just a repeat of the last relationship I was in, or is something new here? Is something different?
mhm,
Whereas that old relationship was emotionally abusive.
mhm.
The more recent relationship I was telling you about was lovely,
Right.
but it just wasn't right. So it's like a refinement of like getting better and better and seeing in your world what that looks like. But then
Yeah.
still though it wasn't right. It wasn't joyful. And my first barometer was like, oh, I just can't be in this much pain anymore in that. And then the new barometer was like, no, it needs to be joyful. So
Mm,
like as I move forward and look into my next relationship, right? Currently single, have been for 2 years, and I think that's been really great for me. Um, is like, okay, well, is this bringing me joy? Whereas like that wasn't the question I was asking before.
mhm. Yeah, and we have, especially speaking Kabbalistically, like, questions create everything.
Right.
They're what open the space for everything to happen. If we're not asking questions, then we're not gonna grow. If we're not asking the right questions, we're not gonna grow in the right way.
Right.
Yeah, so joy is a really good question to ask.
Yeah.
It's, like, probably never gonna go wrong with asking, "Is this my joy?"
Yeah.
You know, I remember there have been times in the mystery school where it's so funny, like, getting back to the complex ego thing, the more we go on our spiritual path, the more we can have a complex ego come up and try and trip us up. There was a time in the mystery school about 7 years ago where I was going through all sorts of deep inner turmoil about, like, what's the right way to how am I gonna find certain things I was looking for?
Mm.
And I wrestled with this for, like, a bunch it was sort of a cluster of decisions around, like, relationships and finances and service and like, a lot of things. I'm not gonna try and tell the whole story right now because 'cause it'd be, like, an hour long. But I took all those to, the founder of the Modern Mystery School, Goodney Goodnison, in a class, and it was just, like, on a lunch break. I was like I sort of laid it out very quickly in about 5 minutes, and he just looked at me, and he was like, "So, are any of those your joy?"
Mm.
And I was like, no." He's like, "Why would you do them? Like you have all these reasons, and they're all irrelevant because none of those are your joy." I was like, "Oh, well, that's really easy." And I just immediately stopped doing all those things. And my life, like, got 100 times better overnight because
Mhm.
I wasn't wrestling with those anymore. It was just so obvious that I didn't need to perpetuate this self-harm, basically, disguised as self-improvement.
Mhm.
Like, my self-harm was totally disguised as self-improvement, whether that was reading books or, um, like thinking or journaling or even meditating and like trying to ask certain questions, but they weren't the right questions. I kept looking down the wrong pathways for my questions. And that was even after being a certified senior guide. And, I was a Kabbalah apprentice at the time. And so it's like we're never really immune to, no matter how far we travel on any spiritual path, in my experience, never really immune to like falling into bad questions and losing, that um, like losing our focus on what will really help us. You have somebody commented before being like, joy is a barometer. So I'll pop that up on the screen here. And it's true. If we don't listen to that joy, then we're going to end up trusting maybe the wrong things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and also what you bring up of like good questions and bad questions, I'm really curious about that. Of
Mhm.
what's an example of a good question and of a bad question?
Mhm.
Um,
Say more. I
well,
jump in there too, but I want to hear what you have to say about that.
well,
Is that-
I mean, I'm sincerely curious, just even for my own for my own self knowledge. Um, but because I asked myself, I guess I'm asking that question, like, okay, well, what's a good question? And it's like, in Kabbalah, we have the 5 questions, right?
Right.
Who am I? What am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is my purpose? But then on like say you're struggling with an issue,
Mhm.
right? Maybe it's financial. Okay, well, what are the questions to ask to get you out of that financial struggle? And actually, that's something I've been working with too, because for a long time I waited tables, and
Mhm.
that and I did it because it was flexible, and I wasn't really committed to anything. I love the freedom, so there are a lot of reasons why I did that. But
Mhm.
but for a long time, but then after a while, I was just like, I hate this. But it was like
Mhm.
the only way that I knew how to like make money to do the things that I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um,
So what questions led you to wait tables? They probably weren't conscious, right?
right, right, yeah. Yeah. They're probably like, okay, well, how do I make money? How do I do this? How do I get some kind of income that fits with my school schedule or this other schedule? They're kind of like practical. I guess
Right.
maybe that's an example of a kind
They're
of self
survival questions.
survival, right? Yeah,
They're practical and they're survival oriented. And we
right,
have to ask those when that's the position that we're in. But, once we've done enough of the survival stuff, at some point, a lot of people just really get sick of asking survival questions.
right.
And so then maybe we have to ask different questions.
Mhm.
Once we've taken care of enough survival stuff, enough
Mhm,
survival needs in our
mhm.
lives.
Right.
So
Then
what stimulated like what other questions did you start asking?
then I started asking myself, well, like, what do I really want to do? Like, if
Mhm,
money wasn't the thing, right? Like, what do I want to do? What are my
mhm,
gifts? Who am I? What am I here for? So I started asking those kinds of questions, and
mhm.
then things started to change.
Yeah. And according to mystery school teachings, we should start asking those questions. In the ancient shamanic societies, people would be initiated around 14 to 16 years old.
Mm,
And they'd be finishing up, what we call like the fourth physical dimension or the fourth phase of evolution out of the 12 sort of life cycle phases of evolution for a human. We call those the 12 physical dimensions. But, the first four are all about your programming, and that wraps up around age 20. But by the time you're 14 to 16 in ancient shamanic societies, that age of spiritual initiation in ancient societies, you'd already be on to the fifth physical dimension of your archetype. Like, how do I fit in with my culture, my tribe, this world? What do I really have to offer? Like, who am I on a higher archetypal level? And what is my, the archetype of us, the archetypes that make us up are all, most of us have many, many archetypes, but we tend to have a primary archetype. And that primary archetype is, archetypes are both very easy to understand and also very nuanced, but in essence, they're the role or the character that we play in the mythological story of our life and our culture. Like, how do we fit in with our culture? How do we fit in with our society? How do we fit in the stories that are being told? And without an archetype, without a story, life is just programming.
Mm.
Life is just the first four physical dimensions. It's very boring. It's living the same thing. It's like, Groundhog Day every day. Just the same thing happens again and again and again. By the time we're 20 years old, if we don't move on to studying our archetype of who am I and how do I fit in with my society and my culture and my world, then we just get lost in the sort of the nonsense of programming and going over and over again through the same motions. So by 14 to 16 years old, we're supposed to be, according to mystery school teachings, moving into that fifth dimension, ideally. We're supposed to be moving into that fifth physical phase of life where we ask these questions about who I really am and how I'm supposed to be contributing to my society.
Mhm.
And that's it's interesting because I was talking earlier about ego twisting things, right?
Yeah.
We have that, but in a very ego twisted way now. We have more people than ever asking like, well, how do I fit in and what is my purpose? And that's really good.
Yeah.
But then we also have this very distorted mirror of social media that's giving us a lot of our answers.
Mhm.
So we're looking in a very broken, very distorted mirror to we're asking the questions and then we're radiating them out to social media and we're seeing like, well, what am I getting back from the people around me? And it's a false reality. I can have a totally crappy day and then I can, you know, put on my best face and do my hair or do my makeup if whatever. What if I don't really wear makeup, but whatever. You get the idea. And I
Yes.
can take a selfie and be like, "Oh my god, like I took a selfie. I had such a great day," and then put that on my social media, and then someone else somewhere else in the world commits suicide because, they saw how awesome my life was and their life wasn't so awesome. And that's just a very, very dramatic example.
Yeah.
But, we've never had more teen suicide and depression and drug use. And there are many, many reasons for that, but
Mhm.
to point a little bit of a finger, like, we're looking in, how many kids even talk to each other, especially since COVID,
Yeah.
but even before COVID because they're online, and they're just connecting with people online. I mean, you and I were talking online, and that's kinda cool. We're 3 time zones away, and we're having this conversation.
Mhm.
So that's a cool use of media. And we're
Right.
having a real in-depth 45-minute long conversation about something, but most things are 2-second memes, and they entertain us, and they give us a little dopamine hit, and then we're on to the next meme, and then
Mhm.
45 minutes later, we're scrolling on our phone still, but we should really be going to sleep because we gotta get up and do something in the morning, but we're still addictively plugged into our phone.
Mhm.
And we all can do that, we all fall prey to that. So,
Mhm.
when we ask these questions, "Who am I?" and then we get our image, our reply shoved back in our face through electronic devices,
Mm.
how true is that? Like, are we getting true answers to the question, "Who am I?"
Well, I think that's a great
I'm not
question.
saying I know the answers here, I'm just putting
Right.
it out there.
Right. Well, I think one of the things that makes me think about is like what's the mirror, right? When you're asking. And since we're talking about trusting ourselves, like part of being human is having those reflections and learning about ourselves through other people, through our relationships, and yes, even through media.
For
Um,
sure.
However, like in the examples you just gave, when that mirror is so distorted, it gives us back like distortion, right? When the mirror is not real, then
Yeah.
it's like, and I think that creates a cycle of almost like mental illness, because there's like a disconnect.
Yeah. Like metaverse illness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so it brings to mind the point of how important it is to have those mirrors and how important it is to have a path and to have, for example, the tools that are in the mystery school. While they're not people necessarily, sometimes they are, like you or and I were both in the school, and I know other initiates in the school, and we're mirrors for one another, or maybe in our clients that we see.
Mhm.
But also the tools can be a mirror, can show you where you're at. Like when you
Mhm.
use them, like the Kabbalah becomes a mirror. You can
Mhm.
see more clearly your life, what you're creating in your life. and then make changes with the energy that you receive
Yeah.
in that process.
Yeah.
And thinking about what you said of how in shamanic societies, like that initiation happened around 14 to 16, we have nothing like that.
Mhm.
And so it just brings to mind how important really these things are, these tools are to get out there and to share with people because they really can save lives.
For sure. For sure. I mean, those ancient shamanic societies are very rare now. When I was in South Africa many, many years ago, over 20 years ago now, and I lived in an African township, and the boys would go away around 17 to 18 years old, and they would do shamanic initiation in the ancestral homelands up north. And then they'd come back, and they were basically the happiest people I've ever met.
Mm.
They had nothing. I don't want to, you know, romanticize that because it wasn't some easy lifestyle at all.
Yeah.
But they were just glowing with joy all the time
Mm.
because they'd spent 40 days in the wilderness facing themselves, getting to know themselves.
Mhm.
And there's not really a substitute for doing something like that.
Mhm.
I did like Outward Bound when I was 14, and that
Mhm.
was the closest that I really had access to. So I spent like 12 days in the woods, and 3 of those days were just totally on my own. And it was so hard. It wasn't even a specifically spiritual thing, but it was this solo time in the wilderness to just ask questions about myself and to
Yeah.
have nothing but the mirror of nature. No phones. No, this is before the internet.
Right.
There was nothing.
Mhm.
So to go out and just with food and a tent, or not even a tent for some of the nights, and face yourself
Mhm.
really gives us an insight that you can't just get sitting at home. You can't just get like on an electronic device. You need other kinds of mirrors to seek those out and and the self-trust that came out of that was huge. Like I was a totally different person when I came back from that trip. I made totally different commitments to myself about what I valued. When our values change, the way that we trust ourselves can really change too.
Right.
The
That's
things that we're holding up as important in our lives. Um, we can ask really deep questions about that and make very meaningful changes that who knows, if I hadn't done that, maybe I wouldn't be here talking to you.
Mhm.
Maybe I wouldn't have listened to myself. Maybe I wouldn't have trusted myself. Maybe I wouldn't have spent most hours after school in high school not doing my homework and meditating instead. And maybe if I hadn't meditated throughout high school and been willing to almost flunk out of my classes, then I wouldn't have pursued Reiki and shamanism in college. If I hadn't pursued Reiki and shamanism in college, maybe I wouldn't have pursued being a professional spiritual healer. And then maybe I never would have asked the questions that led me to the mystery school. And then maybe none of this ever would have happened. Maybe this wouldn't be a podcast. Maybe the hundreds and hundreds of people I've initiated would never be initiated. Who knows? I have no idea. There's no way to know that.
There's no way to know because maybe you would. Maybe we would be here still.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe there would have been some other road to, and that would have been great.
Yeah.
Maybe I would have found another road to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that self-trust that for me started like really, really young,
Mhm.
despite everyone else around me being like, why are you wasting your time meditating? That kind of self-trust. I was like, no, this is what I have to do.
Mhm.
I have to spend most of my teenage years and 20s just meditating. That's how I'm going to do my life purpose. And it's going to lead me somewhere.
Mhm.
And knowing that even though there's no results and there were no fruits for like the better part of a decade, this is leading me somewhere. And the mystery school, fortunately, is way faster than that. It doesn't take a decade to figure something out.
Yeah. Yeah.
But before I found the school, it did take me a decade to figure something out.
Yeah.
It did take me a decade to really ground into myself spiritually. And then that prepared this way. So, wherever people are with self-trust, it's really, I think it's so essential. And we often, we do look outside ourselves for it a lot. What should I do? What should I be doing right now? Maybe my phone will tell me what to do. I'll wake up in the morning and what does it say on my phone? Maybe I'll do that.
Mhm.
kind of at the end of our time here. Any
Yeah.
other words of wisdom that you want to shower on our audience?
I don't have any other words of wisdom. I just just thank you. Thanks for having me on. It was a wonderful discussion, and I hope I hope that it sounds like at least one person got something out of it. So I hope more people do.
Hopefully so.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I had fun too. And thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on, Whitney. Thank you to all of our viewers, both those who are watching live and those who are maybe going to watch this in the future. Again, this podcast is called Unveiling. My name is Jordan Bain. My guest tonight is Whitney Larson. And yeah, have a wonderful evening. Take care, everyone.